My name is Clara Barton, but I prefer Clara. I was a pioneering nurse who founded the American Red Cross. I worked as a hospital nurse in the Civil War as a teacher and a patent clerk. And I did all this at the time when few women worked outside the home. I became a teacher in 1873 at the age of 17. For 12 years, I taught in schools in Canada and West Georgia. I fared well as a teacher because I knew how to handle rambunctious children, particularly the boys. In 1855, I left teaching and moved to Washington, D.C. to begin work as a clerk in the U.S. Patent Office. This was the first time a woman had received a substantial clerkship in the federal government and at a salary equal to a man's. Before my father died, I was able to talk to him about the war effort. My father convinced me that it was my duty as a Christian to help the soldiers. In the April following his death, I returned to Washington to gather medical supplies. Ladies' Aid Societies helped in sending bandages, food, and clothing that would later be distributed during the Civil War. In the August of 1862, I finally gained permission to work on the front lines. I worked to hand out supplies, clean field hospitals, apply dressings, and serve food to wounded soldiers on the front line of several battles, including Cedar Mountain, Second Bull Run, Antietam, and Fredericksburg. In 1864, I was appointed by the Union General Benjamin Butler as the lady in charge of the hospitals at the front of the Army of the James. Among my more frightening experiences was when a bullet tore through my sleeve of my dress without hurting me and killed a man to whom I was tending. I was known as the Angel of the Battlefield. After the end of the Civil War, I discovered that thousands of letters from distraught relatives to the War Department were going unanswered because so many soldiers, were buried in unmarked graves. Many of these soldiers were just labeled as missing. That motivated me to do more about the situation, so I contacted President Lincoln. I was given permission to start the Search for the Missing Men office. The program's purpose was to find or identify soldiers killed or missing in action. My assistants and I wrote 41,855 letters and helped locate more than 22,000 missing men. I spent the summer of 1865 helping find, identify, and properly bury 13,000 individuals who died in the Andersonville prison camp, a Confederate prisoner of war camp in Georgia. I continued this task over the next 4 years, burying 20,000 more Union soldiers and marking their graves. I achieved widespread recognition by delivering lectures around the country about my war experiences from 1865 to 1868. I met Susan B. Anthony and began a long association with the women's suffrage movement. I also met with Frederick Douglass and became an activist for civil rights. I closed the Missing Soldiers Office in 1868 and traveled to Europe. During a trip to Geneva, Switzerland, I was introduced to the Red Cross. I was later invited to be the representative for the American branch of the Red Cross. I became president of the American branch of the society, which held its first official meeting in Washington, D.C., May 21, 1881. I continued to live in my Glen Echo, Maryland home, which also served as the Red Cross headquarters. I published my autobiography in 1907 titled The Story of My Childhood. On April 12, 1912, at the age of 90, I died at home.